I'm Peter Goodwin, and I serve as the president of the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, Maryland's graduate university for the environment. Thank you all for joining us for the launch of the first Maryland Coastal Adaptation Report Card. With more than 3,000 miles of shoreline and the majority of the state's population living and working in the coastal zone, Maryland's coastal communities face particular risks to the impacts of a changing climate. Climate change is causing sea level rise, increasingly frequent and severe storms, acceleration of coastal erosion, saltwater intrusion, hotter summers, to name just a few. Sea levels in Maryland are expected to rise by about 1.5 feet by 2050, and somewhere between 3 and 6 feet by the turn of the century. And we are already witnessing an increase in sunny day flooding in cities like Annapolis, Baltimore, and along the Eastern Shore. A recent report by NOAA found Maryland in the 1980s experienced on average $1 billion weather or climate-related disaster every other year. The frequency of these events has been increasingly steadily, and Maryland experienced 4 such events in 2020 alone. We know there are significant changes underway that are changing our landscape and impacting our communities. We also know there are ways to prepare and adapt to minimize these climate change impacts. We are all fortunate to be in a state that is guided by scientific evidence and through programs such as the Coast Smart Council, led by our Maryland Department of Natural Resources, which helps to anticipate and plan for the consequences of sea level rise and climate change. It is UMCES' core mission to provide unbiased research to help state and national leaders tackle today's environmental challenges. And today, you'll be hearing the results of this independent assessment about how our state is doing. But first, it is my privilege to introduce the Honorable Senator Cardin to start this event. First elected to the US Senate in 2007, Senator Cardin is nationally recognized for his commitment to scientific research to drive economic development while improving human well-being and the environment. Senator Cardin is a leading advocate for the Chesapeake Bay and its restoration. He serves as a senior member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, where he's keenly aware of the importance of adaptation to a changing climate. Due to his very tight schedule, Senator Cardin is unable to be with us for the entire event, but thank you, sir, for being here today to get us started. Senator Cardin, the virtual floor is yours.
Well, Dr. Goodwin, first of all, thank you so much for bringing us together, but more importantly, congratulations on being the captain of this project and give us our first ever Maryland Coastal Adoption Report Card. It's good to be here with my colleagues in state government, Secretary Riccio, Secretary Grumbles. I see Dana Stein from the House of Delegates, one of the great environmentalists, and we have distinguished panelists. So it's really good to be here with the Maryland team. And let me just start off by bragging a little bit. Maryland was the initiator of the Chesapeake Bay program many, many years ago. And the Chesapeake Bay program is the model program for a multi-jurisdictional body of water in regards to making sure that we do everything we can to protect its future. It was Maryland's leadership that brought us to this point, and Maryland has remained in the leadership on so many environmental issues. I say this frequently, but Ben Grumbles is my favorite environmental secretary in the country. I think he does a great job on behalf of the people of Maryland, and we have really worked together in partnership. The Maryland General Assembly has been a true leader in regards to these environmental issues. And once again, you're showing that by initiating this Coastal Adaptation Report Card. I'm proud of the federal partnership in this. You utilize some NOAA funds in order to get this started. That's exactly the type of initiatives that we want to see coming from our states, and Maryland did this. Our leadership has returned globally. I was in Glasgow for the climate summits, and I was proud to be with many of my colleagues in the United States Senate and see the United States leadership in dealing with the global issues. But the realities is that we are dealing with climate change on our coastal resiliency. There's no question that we have challenges. And Dr. Goodwin, you already talked about some of those with sea level rises and dealing with flooding and saltwater intrusions and extreme weather events that are occurring more frequently. Adaptation becomes a critically important part. It's one of the two strategies. First, we certainly want to mitigate our carbon footprint. And there's a lot that we're doing in Maryland to show leadership in being friendlier towards our environment with our greenhouse gas emissions. But we also have to have an adaptation policy. And this report card really points to the way that Maryland has had adaptation strategies, but there's more to be done. Your federal partners are with you. Congressional action has taken place. We passed the infrastructure bill. I'm proud about that because it incorporated provisions that came out of the committee I chair, the subcommittee on infrastructure and the Environment and Public Works Committee, but it includes a very large portion for resiliency. $47 billion are included in the infrastructure bill for resiliency and climate-related programs. $8.7 billion in transportation, $2 billion for coastal resiliency. So we've already made a major down payment at the federal government to try to help you in that regard. We're also looking forward in the Build Back Better budget for additional resources that can be used, tax incentives for friendlier energy sources, green transportation, green buildings, green investments, environmental justice, and $6 billion to NOAA for coastal resiliency. So there's lots of partnerships here from the federal government. And I just want to put a plug into Region 3 with Adam Ortiz from Maryland being our Region 3 administrator. So Maryland will continue to be in the forefront. And what you're doing here really is, I think, an incredibly important contribution. Okay, we got a B-, as I understand. B- is not bad for your first effort. And it shows that we have been attentive to coastal adaptation, but we can do more. We must do more. 4.2 million Marylanders live in this coastal, impacted by the coast in our state. We need to be mindful that at 72% of our population, we need to do a better job. So we also recognize that this is very much intertwined with our commitment to the Chesapeake Bay. How we deal with coastal resiliency will very much impact the future progress that we can make on our national treasure that we are the guardians of, the Chesapeake Bay. So with all that, just wanted you to know that your federal partners are here to help, and I mean that sincerely. We're proud of your initiatives, and we want to make sure that you have the resources and support you need to implement the strongest possible programs for coastal resiliency. And I think this report card will help us get to that point. Congratulations for a job well done.
Thank you so much, Senator Cardin, for those comments, but also for your environmental leadership and exemplary service, and for making the time this afternoon to address this very large group with interest on coastal adaptation. So thank you so much. And we'll now turn to the next speaker, which is going to be Secretary Jeannie Hadaway-Riccio. Secretary Riccio is an Eastern Shore native and became Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources in 2019. Her professional experience includes working for the Maryland Department of the Environment and the National Audubon Society's Maryland, DC office. She has been a state delegate and served in the governor's office. Currently, she serves on the governor's Chesapeake Bay Cabinet, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, and chairs the Maryland's Coast Smart Council. So with that, Secretary Riccio, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Goodwin. As the previous speakers have already outlined, shoreline erosion and coastal flooding, storm events, and even sunny day flooding are impacting communities across our state. But at the same time, we have Chesapeake Bay Agreement and nutrient pollution reduction goals that we are trying to meet. So it's of the utmost importance that we focus on all of the above approaches that reduce our impacts on the environment, reduce our vulnerability, and prepare us for future challenges. At the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, we put this concept into practice. It's what our department refers to in part as resiliency through restoration. And thanks to Governor Hogan's leadership in funding on the ground, nature-based solutions, we have really strong examples to point to throughout Maryland. In fact, in August, the Lieutenant Governor and I had the pleasure of planting trees in support of a project on the West River. If any of you are familiar with the West River, you know that this is an area of vulnerability to flooding, erosion, and coastal storm impacts. So in addition to our trees, the project features a vegetated breakwater and wetlands enhancements that are making the shoreline more resilient, improving water quality, and providing really key habitat to native wildlife. So as Senator Cardin said, we should really be proud of these types of efforts because not many states have been able to make the progress that we have made in Maryland. But in order to continue leading by example and ensure that we continue our progress, we know we needed a thoughtful approach to tracking our progress. That's why our staff was so proud to work with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and other partners on this report card project. With it being a first of its kind, there was a tremendous amount of pressure to ensure that this was the best possible product, and that goal was certainly met. It will not only assist our department in our work, but also the work of the Maryland Climate Change Commission, and it will assist us with planning efforts both statewide and in local jurisdictions. So as Secretary of DNR, as chair of the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group, and as a Maryland citizen, I want to commend the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science and all of those who contributed to this effort. Thank you for answering this challenge and for developing this important tool. We are so grateful for the collaboration, and we stand ready to assist with the work ahead as we continue to drive success in Maryland.
Secretary Riccio, do you mind introducing Secretary Grumbles?
I would be happy to do that. Secretary Grumbles often likes to remind me that my first job out of college was for the Maryland Department of the Environment. And I have to say that it has just been a tremendous honor and privilege to have the opportunity to work with him. He has been a tremendous leader in the environmental space for Maryland, both as a Secretary of the Department of Environment, but also as the lead of our Maryland Climate Change Commission, and really in corralling our entire Bay Cabinet to ensure that we're collaborating and working together on all of these important issues. So with that, I turn it over to Secretary Grumbles.
Thank you, Jeannie. And thanks to your great staff at DNR who helped lead the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group for the Climate Change Commission for Maryland. And thanks to UMCES, the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science. You have a lot to be proud of. I have to tell you that one of the most important steps we can take is to put in place a report card that tracks and measures the progress we're making and what we need to do for resiliency. And so this groundbreaking report card being released today, it's one of the most important things that Marylanders can do for the whole nation and for the world to show what indicators are needed to advance resiliency. As Jeannie knows, in my role as chair of the Climate Change Commission for the state of Maryland, I try to use a bumper sticker slogan from time to time because we really do track. Our state and many other states do a great job in tracking greenhouse gas reduction, pollution prevention, mitigating the causes of climate change. And we have very bold goals, at least 50% reduction by 2030. But we also need to track our progress and all the important work we've done and need to do on adaptation and resiliency so that we can not only be half as dirty by 2030, but twice as sturdy by 2030. And that bumper sticker is meaningless unless there's science-based metrics and indicators to show we're moving in the direction of sturdiness and resiliency and adaptation. And so this report, we're the state is showing, actually setting a shining example for other states. This first of its kind report is going to lead to more progress and action on the greenhouse gas reduction level, but also particularly in the coastal areas, making sure there is room for the wetlands to move, making sure that smart growth and Coast Smart principles are translated into action. So I'm very pleased to see this report card being launched. I will look forward to the report card being updated on a periodic and regular basis to track the progress. We have a lot of work to do, but with DNR, with Governor Hogan's leadership, with the citizens of Maryland and academia and leaders throughout the state, I know we've got a strong roadmap for resiliency. I also just want to tout as the Secretary of the Maryland Department of the Environment that we recognize that climate actions and resiliency are key to making real progress. So our Water and Science Administration has issued 50 actions for climate responsibility and progress. And a big part of it is resiliency. And the last thing is just simply to say this report card fits in perfectly with the report that was issued at COP26 in Glasgow. I was there as well on behalf of the governor and the state. And the US Climate Alliance, 24 governors, issued a report called Governor's Playbook on Resiliency, 12 steps. And step number 5 is to establish a systematic way to measure progress on adaptation and resiliency. So we have a lot to be proud of and a lot of important work to do. And on that note, it's my honor to introduce the next speaker and very distinguished member of the General Assembly and distinguished member of the Climate Change Commission, and that's Delegate Dana Stein. He's been a delegate representing Baltimore County since 2006. He's the Vice Chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee in the House, and he serves on the Climate Change Commission. He's also Executive Director of Civic Works. It's a nonprofit service organization which strengthens Baltimore's communities through education, skills development, and community service, which is a very important component of resiliency and responsible climate action. And he's one of the strongest champions for natural carbon sequestration and greening our environment. Delegate Stein.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for your leadership on climate and your leadership of the State's Commission on Climate Change. You know, we know that the climate risks that many of our coastal communities face will continue and will be magnified for decades. And to help communities adapt to global warming, we need to design assessment and planning tools. And this report card is a big step forward in that effort. What I particularly like about the report card is that it not only grades the state's adaptation to climate change, but it makes recommendations on how to address areas where we need to do better. For example, the report card describes steps we can take to better prepare for flooding and how we can better address the socioeconomic threats of climate change. So I want to thank the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science for developing this very innovative report card and for the partnership and leadership of MDE, DNR, and Senator Cardin. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Katie Mae Lauman. Dr. Lauman is a science integrator with the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, and she's been at UMCES since 2018. She earned her PhD from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science and her MS from Columbia University. She's an expert in scientific assessments and was the lead on this first ever adaptation report card. So Dr. Lauman.
Thank you, Delegate Stein. And before I begin, I want to emphasize the fact that the pathway to do this work was really paved by the great leadership in Maryland, as exemplified by the speakers that we've already heard from today. So thank you, all of you. And thanks everyone for attending. I'm very pleased to present to you the results of this first ever Maryland Coastal Adaptation Report Card. As we know, climate change is already happening and coastal communities are the first to be affected. Impacts include erosion and the loss of important habitats like wetlands. Effects like these are already being felt along Maryland's coast, where 72% of our state's population lives and works. Climate change is unavoidable, so adaptation is crucial. The state of Maryland and our coastal jurisdictions are already investing in adaptation. And by adaptation, I mean processes and actions that improve the ability of a community to withstand climate impacts. Examples include shoreline protection and green infrastructure. Although Maryland has been a leader in coastal adaptation, there has been a need to clarify adaptation targets and track progress toward those targets. Report cards are an effective tool in doing just that. They help communities identify goals, assess conditions, and guide and measure progress towards goals. UMCES has been using the report card process to assess conditions, for example, in the Chesapeake Bay report card, for over a decade. So we decided to use this report card method to assess adaptation in order to set adaptation goals and assess conditions, as well as establish a framework to track improvement over time. The report card process is collaborative and data intensive. We began by conducting an extensive literature review to see what work had already been done to assess adaptation worldwide and what potential indicators had previously been suggested. We then identified stakeholders should be involved in developing our report card. Ultimately, we engaged over 100 stakeholders, including scientists, managers, members of the public, and others for this collaborative work. We worked with them throughout report card development, and everything presented here today is reflective of their efforts. To develop the report card, this team identified indicators, set thresholds for scoring, and scored the indicators. To select the indicators, we identified the most concerning climate change threats, how they're being addressed or how they should be addressed, and what specific adaptation actions are most critical. This resulted in the selection of 15 indicators to measure adaptation, falling into 4 categories. In the socioeconomic category, we have business disruption, loss coverage, preserved farmland, and repetitive lost properties. The ecosystem indicators are wetlands, forests, shoreline erosion, and beneficial use of dredge materials. In planning, we assessed nuisance flood and green infrastructure plans and flood mapping. And in flooding, we looked at critical facilities, community rating system, floodplain population, and freeboard height. To assess the indicators, we identified target or threshold conditions based on science, expert opinion, and legislative goals. We then used the best available data to compare current condition of each indicator to the threshold condition, and ultimately generated a score for each indicator on a score of 0 to 100% and assigned each a letter grade. Stepping through each category, we see that ecosystem scored an A, meaning that most indicators in the category meet or are close to meeting adaptation goals. As an example, we'll look at the wetlands indicator. Wetlands are important both as a habitat and in that they buffer against climate change threats, but they're also threatened by climate change, and wetland loss is an increasing problem. The state of Maryland has a regulatory goal of no loss of wetland acreage, and this was our threshold. Based on the most updated wetland acreage available, there was no wetland loss from 2006 to 2011, and this resulted in a score of 100%, meaning adaptation goals are met. Moving on, the flood category scored a C, indicating some progress towards adaptation goals with work still needed. Floodplain population scores an A and is the best scoring indicator in this category. However, critical facilities require significant improvement. These facilities must continue to operate during emergency events, and they include hospitals, emergency services, and fire stations like the flooded one seen here. Flooding can shut these facilities down, making them inoperable during emergencies, and any risk of that is too high. So we set a threshold of no critical facilities in flood hazard areas. Examining county level data on critical facilities, we found a score of 10%, showing essentially there are too many critical facilities in flood zones and at risk during climate events. This must be mitigated in order to ensure human safety during these events. The planning category scored a B, coming close to meeting adaptation goals. Jurisdictions are making progress in planning, but more work is still needed, particularly in terms of flood mapping. A committee of flood planning experts, scientists, and stakeholders set a threshold that we should have comprehensive flood risk maps, along with technical assistance for using these maps, available at multiple levels. Based on their expert knowledge of already existing mapping products, they found the indicator to have a score of C, with progress being made, but much more work still being needed. The socioeconomic category scored a C, indicating progress, but needing improvement across all indicators. Particular effort is needed to improve repetitive lost properties. And these are properties that have frequent flood insurance claims, but they can be mitigated. For example, the house shown here is being elevated to better withstand flooding events. The threshold for this indicator is that all repetitive lost properties should be mitigated, but assessing data on these properties, we found that most are not yet mitigated, failing to meet adaptation goals and resulting in a score of F. Finally, what we've all been waiting for, the state of Maryland gets a B- overall in adaptation. And this shows that as a state, we're close to meeting our goals, but more effort is required. Areas of particular need, such as repetitive lost properties and critical facilities, can be improved through structural adaptation. And indicators that score somewhat well can still be improved. For example, loss coverage could benefit from public outreach programs on flood risk and insurance awareness. Ultimately, this report card provides a framework that can be used to measure progress toward coastal adaptation goals as efforts continue. And in addition to opportunities for improvement, we've identified particular challenges that we'll face. These include the need for more data, both in terms of indicator data and in the need for continuously updated, integrated data and mapping products that can help with planning for adaptation. Additionally, adaptation is expensive and funding is needed to achieve many targets. Although opportunities for funding are available, stakeholders at the local level indicated that these opportunities are difficult to access. So this process for acquiring funding needs to be made more accessible and assistance needs to be provided in applying for funds. And finally, while efforts for adaptation incorporate equity principles, improvements are needed. It's essential to be able to track these in order to ensure that adaptation efforts and funding are equitably apportioned across socioeconomic and demographic lines. For more information, you can see the full report card and the methods document available on our website, or you can contact me with further questions. And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ava Richardson, who will be discussing some active adaptation efforts going on in Baltimore City. Ava works for the Baltimore Office of Sustainability, where she helps catalyze urban sustainability goals. She is a PhD candidate in the Environmental Health and Engineering departments at Johns Hopkins, and she's an advocate for systems change, applying her analytic skills to advance policies and initiatives in harmony with social equity, people, environmental sustainability, and economic prosperity.
Dr. Ullman, for that introduction. And I just want to echo all of the environmental champions on the call today that I am really honored to join in this announcement of Maryland's first ever coastal report card. Here in Baltimore City, we are committed to advancing sustainability and resiliency across the city and serving as a key partner in climate adaptation in the state of Maryland. Our current efforts to adapt to climate change requires prioritizing frontline communities who are most impacted by the effects of climate change, including Black, Latino, and other marginalized groups. In Baltimore, we have our some examples of that are our Resiliency Hub program, which is a growing network of 15 partners that provides essential resources during times of crisis. These sites provided invaluable community resources throughout the pandemic, distributing food, water, and allowing access to power in the event of an outage. Hubs receive a range of support from the city, including emergency preparedness and response training and supplies. And some of the hubs are equipped with solar battery backup infrastructure to, again, provide power in the event of outages. We also have approaches to extreme heat, which include emergency response and heat management, long-term infrastructure work, and public engagement in heat-related services. This includes cooling relief for vulnerable populations in the form of cooling centers, water, fans, and aid to provide residents with weatherization services, equipping their homes with the necessary insulation to control temperatures. We realize the urban heat island effect in cities such as Baltimore is intense, and we know that more needs to be done to ensure that we are protecting vulnerable populations during these incidences of extreme heat. Additionally, we are advancing green infrastructure, ranging from bioswales to planters to increasing permeable surfaces. I want to thank you all again for including Baltimore in this announcement as we continue to partner with the state to further climate adaptation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Ms. Richardson, for that nice summary, and it's inspiring to see what the city is you're doing. And so what we're going to do is to go through the list of questions here. And the first question I was going to focus on is that we've obviously heard from several of the panelists who've spoken. Many of you are operating at the national level as well as within Maryland. And the question was, have you seen any other example of this type of report card and systematic assessment of adaptation done elsewhere? And perhaps Secretary Grumbles, we could start with you and then go to Secretary Riccio as you're really talking with your counterparts around the country.
Well, like Secretary Riccio, I know that several states are trying to follow Maryland on actions for coastal resiliency. But in terms of a science-based systematic report card to keep track and identify meaningful indicators, I'm not familiar with another state that's done something this specific and this impressive. I've checked in with the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is a great organization with 24 governors who, like Governor Hogan, who are committed to climate action. And so this, I do agree that this is a first of its kind report, and it's something to be proud of. And now the expectations are high that we're going to continue to follow through and improve on the metrics and add new indicators from time to time and follow through with action.
Thank you, Secretary Grumbles. And Secretary Riccio, did you have anything to add from your perspective as leading the Adaptation and Resiliency Work Group?
Sure. Well, I agree with the comments from Secretary Grumbles. The one thing that I would add is I think one of the great aspects of this report card tool is that while it is based in a very specific methodology and very specific data, it is presented in a very clear and concise way that I think makes it easy to use for the general public, for our departments, for nonprofit organizations. So, I really commend the team for being able to boil down a really complicated issue and present it in a way that is easily communicated and comprehended.
Great, thank you, Secretary Riccio. And the next question here is just asking, Dr. Lohman, maybe we could go to you first of all, and for the second part of the question, other panelists could certainly add. But the question is, if you can remember off the top of your head, approximately how many repetitive lost properties are we talking about? And the second part of the question is, what can and should the state be doing to reduce that number? So, Katie, you can give the scientific part, and then we'll go to the other panelists.
So the repetitive lost properties data were from MEMA, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, and I can't provide the exact number of properties. I can say that quite a few of them are unmitigated, and our recommendations for how to reduce this number or how to improve this score would just be to ensure that funding is accessible to those communities that have a lot of these properties and that need funding to mitigate them. Mitigation can be expensive. Raising a house, like you saw in that photograph, is not cheap. And some homeowners or property owners may not have the funding to do that themselves.
Great. Well, thank you. And perhaps we can jump around the panelists just to for your thoughts on the second part of that question. And Secretary Riccio, could I turn to you first of all? And then perhaps we could go to Delegate Stein, and then Ms. Richardson, perhaps you could say a little about what the city of Baltimore is thinking about doing at the local government level. But Secretary Riccio, would you like to go first?
Sure. So we have been doing a lot of work in this space through community outreach, also working with local jurisdictions on planning, and through CoSmart to try to provide some good examples of how to improve these types of situations.
Thank you. And Delegate Stein, your thoughts?
Sure. As I mentioned, one of the items I really like about this report card is that it does say which indicators we're doing well on and which ones not so well. In fact, a couple, the report card says that a couple of the indicators were failing. And I think there were flooding and the location of critical facilities in floodplain areas, and then the repetitive loss property issue. And the report card does make a number of specific recommendations as to how to address those. I mean, and I think in particular for the safety and security of coastal communities, the critical facility issue is something that needs to be addressed, be it through additional funding for these facilities to be sort of hardened in a climate sense, so that in the event of storms and storm surges, that they're not overwhelmed. They can stay in service. So, it's one of the items I really like about the report card is that it doesn't just focus on what we're doing well, but on areas we need to improve, and it makes specific recommendations.
Could I just chime in on the repetitive loss, or it's essentially getting at the retreat component, which there is such a thing as honorable retreat, and understanding humility and embracing through science and modeling and better predictions how to respond and be proactive. And with the Department of Emergency Management and the Department of Planning at the state agency level, working with DNR and the environment area, we have a very clear signal here that on repetitive loss and retreat, we all need to work together, and most importantly at the local level with planning, and also continue to embrace principles. Governor Hogan made it clear to us as we oversee clean water and other environmental revolving fund programs, major funding programs, that you need to make sure that there's sustainability in every dollar invested. And sustainability doesn't just mean funding maintenance, maintaining the facility and operating the area, but it also means making sure it's built to last and be resilient. And that includes being sited in the right area, not in harm's way. So greater use of planning and modeling, advancing stormwater resiliency in Maryland, it's a priority for us. And that F report card on retreat, repetitive loss, and critical facilities is going to be an important reminder to us at the regulatory and funding level for the state. And I hope it'll mean even greater investments in smart coastal management and investing in infrastructure that is a sound investment and is not going to be underwater imminently, or be subject to those extreme weather events so often that occur on the coast.
Right. Thank you, Secretary Grumbles. And Ms. Richard, would you like to add anything from the local government, from the City of Baltimore's perspective, what you're doing to perhaps plan?
Certainly, I would like to just share, certainly not an expert in that regard, but I would like to share that we do have an MS4 permit in place, and that allows us to support flood insurance discounts for residents. So that is a critical option to improve access to residents to that service. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question that popped up, this is for Dr. Laumann. The question was, could you elaborate a little bit on how the wetland score was developed? And I expect it's for residents that see what's happening at Blackwater and places like that. If you could just give a little bit about the methodology of how that score was derived.
Absolutely. So we have data on woody wetlands and emergent wetlands, which are two ways wetlands can be classified across Maryland's coastal counties. And those data came from the NOAA Office for Coastal Management. And the most recent data available were from 2006 and 2011. We looked at the total amount of wetland acreage in 2006 and the total amount in 2011, and simply looked to see if there was an increase or decrease in wetlands overall net change. So you could have a decrease in some areas and an increase in others could make up for that. We actually found a very slight increase of 0.12% in overall wetland acreage across Maryland's coastal counties during those years. So what we're doing to manage for wetlands is working on a statewide level.
Right, thank you. And the next question here, I think, is asking the panelists to pull out their crystal balls and say, what do you expect Maryland to look like in 10 years' time from now? Given the trends which we've just heard through the this report card, and I'm not sure who would like to field that first of all. Secretary Riccio, your various groups and scientists are looking at this closely. So what do you anticipate 10 years from now?
So, I would say based on the report card that was released today, we should be cautiously optimistic about where Maryland is in terms of progress and meeting our goals. As previous speakers have heard, it's certainly not time to rest on our laurels, but time to continue the work. I will also say that I think it's great to use the traffic light measurement, the red, yellow, green, because that will really help us to focus and prioritize the work that we need to do going forward. Because, we're all doing a lot of work in this space and it's all important, but being able to triage and prioritize is going to be really important for community members and decision makers across the state.
Secretary Grumbles.
Peter, I feel absolutely confident that in 10 years, Maryland is going to be warmer and wetter and wiser. And wiser means a continued march towards nature-based green infrastructure solutions, increasing reliance on a low carbon economy, embracing a clean energy economy, and looking at those areas for our continually growing population that can live most comfortably and sustainably. And everyone loves the coast. So I'm sure that given how much the state has shown leadership and stewardship for the coastal region, that will continue. It's just going to have a dramatically increased emphasis on the reality of insurance, working with the Insurance Commission, and also the tools that we have at the state and federal level to map out high risk and reduce it by greening and growing the economy in ways that reduce the risk of severe property loss and loss of life due to flooding and sea level rise. So I am optimistic, particularly with this report card, because it identifies so many indicators that we have much to reinforce. We have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. And Delegate Stein, you've been a wonderful and very articulate advocate that we're doing this for the next generation and the generation after that. So what do you see Maryland 10 years from now?
Well, to echo what Secretary Grumble said, that we know that the threats from climate change are only going to get worse. Sea level rise is inexorable. as is saltwater intrusion. So more coastal area land will be inundated, more farmland will be subject to saltwater intrusion. The severe weather events, be they major storms, high summer temperatures, those extremes are only going to continue and probably get worse. So we know we have to be prepared for these impacts. But at the same time, I think the report guide gives us hope that we're moving in the direction of building resiliency and adaptation. So especially the most vulnerable communities can be protected from these impacts, be it through further shoreline protection or the type of green infrastructure that Secretary Crumbles described that can mitigate the increased stormwater from these stronger storms. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be better prepared for these impacts, even as these impacts continue to worsen, and the impacts will be magnified until we get to a state in which we have pretty much decarbonized our economy, which won't be for a few decades, but we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you. And David, did you have anything to add? What do you see the city of Baltimore 10 years from now, given the focus that the city has on addressing these issues?
Absolutely. On Tuesday, January 18th, the city actually announced a carbon neutrality goal, 30-60-100 goal. So 30% reduction by 2025, 60% reduction by 2030, and 100% reduction by 2045. And so we certainly expect to see a decline in our emissions over that time. And currently we're in the process of our climate action plan update, which is really going to inform how we actually move towards these adaptation and think more critically about the mitigation approaches to climate change. And so I see in 10 years, Baltimore being a bustling and thriving hub for the economy and for environmental sustainability in Baltimore. In Maryland.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Ava. And the next question should be fairly short. Dr. Laumann, I'll address this to you, and it's a difficult one to answer, but do you have an estimate of the number of people that may have to move away from waterfront property? I know that's a difficult question because you can invest in a single structure and there's a lot of innovation around that, but have any estimates of the number of Maryland's potentially impacted?
I can't put an exact number on that. And part of that is because there are a lot of adaptation efforts and actions that can be taken that would perhaps reduce the need of some of those people to move from the floodplain and flood zones. I can follow up with whoever asked that question after.
Great. And the next question I think is a very good one, very poignant. And the question is, what can the average Marylander do to help? And I'm sure that all of our panelists here have some ideas. And perhaps Secretary Riccio, should I start with you, and then we'll just cycle around the screen to the other members for their thoughts. So what can the average Marylander do to help what the agencies are doing to address this problem?
Sure. Well, a lot of the work that we do, particularly at the Department of Natural Resources, is really community-based work. So continuing to work with our department to identify critical needs right in their community provides us with an opportunity not only to improve adaptation and resiliency, but it's also an educational opportunity, and it allows us to engage citizens in a way that has a meaningful impact and that they have buy-in. So whether it's planting trees, securing a shoreline, enhancing wetlands, there are so many different ways that we can really be active at the community level.
Thank you, Secretary Riccio. We'll go through the state agencies first. So Secretary Grumbles, what are your thoughts? What can the average Marylander do to assist efforts?
I understand that the risks are real and also manageable with a focus on conservation and restoration. I love the DNR's resiliency through restoration program. but also in local planning decisions or watershed organizations focusing on the resiliency, the buffers that wetlands and coastal marshes provide, and the importance of ensuring that any infrastructure project, whether it's transportation or other forms of linear infrastructure or not linear, are built in a responsible way, located in a proper area, and built for extreme weather and saltwater intrusion and sea level rise. That's a wise investment, and citizens lead the way for agencies and elected officials to respond appropriately.
Thank you. Should we go to Delegate Stein next, particularly with
Thank
your
Sure, there are a
nonprofit
lot.
as well? Yeah.
Thank you. There are a lot of things that individuals and families can do. Certainly, reducing one's carbon footprint via electrification of your transportation or your heating and hot water systems at home. And there are state and federal incentives to do that. And then also one of the things that Secretary Riccio mentioned, which I would emphasize, plant trees, native trees, but plant trees in your home, in your yard, or if you don't have, say if you're an apartment dweller, in your neighborhood. Trees are great in so many ways for the climate, for the bay. So that's some of it's one of the most effective and least expensive options.
Thank you. Ms. Richardson, I know you're doing a lot to encourage and excite the citizens of Baltimore. So would you like to highlight just a few of the activities you have underway?
Absolutely. Definitely when it comes to just being prepared, ensuring that, especially when it comes to any event of emergency, that you have a plan in place, whether or not that is ensuring that you have flood insurance. And I saw the comment in the chat about just the cost of that, and that is certainly an issue, but advocating for more supports from your local government in terms of helping communities and homeowners prepare for any disaster events, because that's critically important when it comes to resilience. Getting really involved in your community and helping to educate some of your neighbors about some of the things that they can do on a daily basis. Any Baltimore City resident, we have actually a list of things that people can consider, including car-free days to help limit your carbon footprint, using more active forms of transportation, such as biking or walking, and committing to that. And there's also, again, we're in the middle of the Maryland 2022 legislative session, and there's a lot of exciting climate bills that are coming down the pipe, and getting involved in those and supporting those bills that we know are going to help us move the needle on climate change adaptation.
Thank you. And Dr. Laumann, is anything you'd like to add from the other panelists' comment from the large number of stakeholders who contributed to the report card? Anything that jumps out to you that wasn't already mentioned?
I would like to say first off that we had so many contributors from across all of Maryland's coastal counties, which was fantastic. And I'd also just like to follow up on something that Ms. Richardson said about the flood insurance cost. And there is a program called Community Rating System through FEMA, and that is a program that was in fact one of our indicators. And it is certainly not necessarily a very simple system, but it is a system that communities as a whole can enter into and achieve certain adaptation metrics and receive insurance premium discounts. So it certainly is an issue. Insurance costs are high, and it's something that needs to be mitigated, but there are some systems in place to help with that.
Yeah, we are fortunate to benefit from that system in Baltimore, but for other places that don't have it, just recommending that they advocate for that.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay, well, I'd like to, we are just about out of time. I'd just like to thank everybody for their participation. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but we will respond to the questions that came in. And I would encourage anyone, if things occur to you afterwards, please feel free to email Dr. Laumann to share your ideas and thoughts about whether the next iteration of the report card, how it could be improved, or just other questions about this year's report card. So with that, I'd like to thank particularly the panelists which have given their time this afternoon to participate. And we'd like to thank all of you for your leadership in helping the state adapt to climate change. And for the audience, this was quite almost overwhelming, the wonderful participation that we received around this. So I think it does show the critical importance of adaptation to Marylanders, as well as the recovery of the Bay that the secretaries were so articulate in explaining earlier. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. Thank you for your questions, and I'll wish you all a wonderful weekend, and please continue to stay engaged with this adaptation program, whether it's in an individual agency, the NGOs. We saw that the dredging program scored an A, their wonderful outreach program of the Department of Transportation and the Port of Baltimore. So with that, please continue to stay engaged, and let's give all of the panelists a virtual round of applause. Thank you all.
And congratulations, Dr. Longman, on the report.
Thank you. We had a great team behind the whole effort. It's really thanks to everyone who participated, all of our stakeholders, all of our experts and scientists, and of course, all of the great leadership that has made this effort possible.
Thank you, Dr. Laumann. Please thank your internal team as well as the agency collaborators on this major effort. So
Thank you.
with that, wishing everyone a great weekend. Take care.